Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Welcome back to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 98, how to identify where your sales are coming from and make more of them. And we're going to be looking at this from the perspective of buying leads. And we're going to quickly set out how to make sense of the data that you have and isolate individual moments that are leading to sales. Simon, let's begin with the beginning. What's the first thing to consider when people who are buying leads are analysing the data, trying to work out what's happening?
I think at the top level, the first thing you want to do is try and automate some of the reporting, so that you can see at a sort of relatively high level what's working and what isn't, and then dig further in at that point rather than the sort of minutiae immediately. You just want to be able to run some quick reports, see what's working, what isn't, automate that so that it's just, you can have eyeballs on it like every minute of the day if you want, or check it every hour, whatever it is that the time frames that you're working to. What you'll tend to see is either like one of those things or none of those things happen, which is generally the problem.
Well, I was going to say, we've not just randomly come up with this podcast without realizing there is a slight problem in the way that not everybody, but a lot of people, a lot of companies buying leads currently do this. So let's just establish that, like, for the average person who might be making this mistake, what does that mistake look like?
So I think the main thing people do is they treat it as a binary thing at a very high level. So it's like, this channel isn't working, or this source isn't working, or this source is great and this channel is great, and they'll dismiss, as in turn off channels or sources or whatever, at a relatively high level that they think aren't working. But the issue with that is that in both of those scenarios, the devil is actually in the detail, because in both cases, what you'll find is there will be individual elements of the data that make up, we're talking about leads, that lead to sales. So even from a really bad source, if you dig into it, generally you'll see they might have individual ads, individual landing pages, individual snippets of information that are actually over-indexing far above anything else that they're doing. And so the key is to maximize those and be able to find that information out quickly. And it's the same with the sources that are performing really well. I've done this loads in the past before, right? Gone like, this source is amazing. We're buying leads from X, it's all working really well. But the moment you actually start digging into it, let's imagine there were 5 ads that were running, and you're getting all the leads off it, you're making sales, whatever else, and then you're analyzing just at a top level, this is working really well. But then you dig it back to the ads, and of those ads, 3 were actually performing really badly, and 2 were performing really well. The thing is, because nobody's actually tracking that information at an ad level or a sort of granular level, they're not picking up on what's over-indexing and what isn't. And that is the main issue, because if you can start to pick into those individual moments that are driving really hard sales is the wrong word, really driving the sales, could be hard sales. No, you want them to be easy sales, driving the easy sales. That's actually where you're going to use data analytics to really turbocharge your results.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting viewpoint to come here from, because a lot of the time we talk about tactics that you can do before you actually analyze everything to make sure the sales happen, to make sure the intent's better to buy better leads, all that kind of stuff we talk about all the time. But this is more what you can do once you've got the data to refine your process and actually tweak it. And I guess I don't want to generalize, but what we're sort of talking about here is encouraging people to have a more sophisticated approach to how they're handling the data and to actually get better insights from that data, which is going to improve their performance.
Yeah, and the key thing is getting the data in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And that means the ad that is generating the lead, the keyword that's generating it, the native article, the sub affiliate, whatever it is. You need to get all that information in addition to the lead itself from the source that it's coming from or the channel it's coming from. So these could be keywords if you're buying PPC leads. And marketers know this, right? But the thing is, if you're working with third-party suppliers and they can drive a cheaper CPC on their end with a particular type of ad that isn't necessarily performing as well, but you're buying it because the overall standard is still as good, as in, you know, like the overall average is acceptable to the CPA that you're working to. But the reality is you want less leads and more sales. So you'd be better off exploring the ads that are really over-indexing, improving and reiterating on those, dropping the ones that don't work and paying a higher CPL because you're getting much higher conversion rates. But it all comes down to receiving the right data in the first place. And this is really what the secret of analyzing data to make more sales is about, is getting the right information so that you can determine the exact microscopic moments that are actually driving the sales. Because if you don't get that data, you can't do any of it. You're stuck at a high level of that source, that channel.
I'm going to ask a basic question about, as I often do, I try and think of it from the perspective of the listener who might be wanting me to ask this question to. So if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, right, I agree in theory on this, but like I don't have access to that information. Like I don't know. All I know is like what channel's performing. Like how do people get more granular? Essentially, in basic terms, how do they go and get that information to give them the insights they need?
So let's imagine you're buying leads from a third party, and that third party has their own brand. They have like a series of landing pages. They're buying lead, or you've got different sources that are using keywords. Some are using PPC, some are using native advertorials, some might be using affiliates, as in email affiliates, and others are using ads on Facebook, TikTok, and somewhere else. First thing is you want to know what those ads are, the keywords, and you want those passed in the leads, either as an identifier of the ad, even if it's like ad 1, ad 2, ad 3, ad 4, or get the keyword passed in itself. So the very thing that has attracted that person to come into the lead generation brand in the first place, you want to know at an individual level what that actually is. Then you want to know the landing page or whatever it is that's generating the lead. It could be a phone call, it could be a landing page, it could be a face-to-face. You want to know the agent that's generating the leads if it's face-to-face, the agent if it's telephone leads. You want all of that passed within the data itself. So then when you look at overall reports at a high level, you're just seeing high performance, low performance. And then you can dig into the granular moments of high performance and low performance and actually see at a code level, as in ad 1, ad 2, exactly where the sales are coming from. And you can go back to the source that's generating the leads and go, you're over-indexing on sales massively from these particular ads or these keywords or whatever it is. Can we build more like that? Drop these other ones that aren't performing, and we will pay you a higher CPL if we can achieve the same conversion rates overall that we're getting from these 2 ads out of the 5 that you're sending me. You've got to have the data to do this.
Yeah, I was going to say there's almost 2 aspects to this. Just to clarify, there's what the title is, how to go in there and identify where they're coming from. And I said at the moment, but before that, there's a step that we need to sort of establish, which is making sure the correct systems are in place to receive the data in the right way and actually give you that data you need.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, whether or not you can run those really granular reports in systems that you're using, if you can't, you need to create webhooks into another system with that data. So, you know, if you want to go like really granular and build massive reports and see it all in pie charts and whatever else, you could use Tableau or Microsoft BI or, you know, whatever it is that you want to use. If you want to do it at a sort of, I don't know, more Google Sheets or Excel level, you know, I'm sure you can build those reports out. The idea is you can just automate it, so you're not having to do any of it manually. So I wouldn't use Excel. I'd try and use G Sheets and actually feed the information back in. But yeah, you've got to go granular. You need all that information. It's the same with affiliates. You know, you want to be knowing if there's different email creatives, for example, that are being sent out, which creative is driving it, which subsource, which list that's being used, which landing page, all this information. And it might feel like it's overkill, but it's not overkill, or you stop seeing it as overkill if you improve your conversion rates by 20% from every source that you're dealing with, right? Like,
Exactly,
feels
yeah.
like underkill. Um,
Yeah, I think it's interesting way of looking at it because, like I say, we spend so long looking at how to make sure the data's good and how to handle it that we don't often do it retroactively to go back and say, right, what's there, how can we improve it? Which kind of brings me around to the next point, and I'm a bit wary about bringing this up because, you know, I forewarn people, don't switch off the minute you hear me talk about it, but everyone's talking about AI at the moment. At least you can't go on LinkedIn without reading some sort of, you know, post about how to use it. And I don't want to veer into territory and bore people who are fed up with it. But in this context, it can be pretty useful. And like, you know, how can people listening use AI, machine learning, that kind of thing, to give them better insights? Because that's how I think, that's how I initially think of AI in this context. It's understanding data, like that big data, that's what it's used for, right?
Yeah. So I think there's three things within this just related to what you've said. So one is in relation to talking about it. Someone said to me about this podcast and about LinkedIn posts that we do and stuff like that, that you go real tactical real quickly. And
Is that
what
an
they
insult? I don't.
No, as in they were like, you know, you maybe should talk more overarching and things. But the reality is, the people that I personally follow, I think you're the same, and then whether people are listening or not, it's quite easy to talk about overarching concepts, right? Like I can easily talk about AI. Like I could just put Chat GPT, tell me about yourself. But it's quite difficult to actually go tactical because it means that you have to know what you're doing. Like you can only talk at a tactical level, and if you can actually implement it and do it and have like a vision of what needs to happen. And so that's why I think it's good to talk about AI, but do it at like a tactical level. So how exactly like you said, how on earth can you use it to do this rather than just, oh, AI is great, go and implement it. And it's like, well, yeah, how the fuck do I go and do that? Like
Yeah.
doesn't I don't find any use. All the people that I follow and listen to and stuff, they go real tactical real quick and tell me how to do things. So the second thing I want to mention is we and I think we've mentioned this in the podcast before, but I'll mention it again. We actually built a machine learning program in Databall. We don't want to talk about Databall. I'm just going to tell you this anyway because I find it. I was just talking about it earlier with a couple of colleagues. I think we started building it 6 or 7 years ago, right? Long time
Yeah.
ago. And it works in a very similar way with natural language processing. And in fact, you know, one of the data scientists that came and
Yeah.
worked on it. Yeah, I think you were at uni with him. Um, who,
Yeah, I messaged him. It was like, I need a job. I was like, I've got a fun project for you.
yeah, and yeah, it works in a very similar way to Chat
Yeah.
GPT. The interesting thing is, 6 or 7 years ago, we literally could not give this fucking thing away. Like, I actually stopped, and this is what we've spoken about on the podcast before. I actually stopped talking about it at one point, right? We tried for 6 months, maybe a year, to get different companies to use it, realize the benefits of it, how they could implement it in their systems and processes, and how it can improve like their analytics and whatever. And for anyone listening, and if you one of the people I spoke to, like you'll know, I fucking talked about this thing constantly for a long period of time, and internally. I get really excited and be like, we're going to be changing the world with this fucking thing. No one on earth is doing this. This is going to be amazing. And for anyone that's listening, no one would take it. Everyone, it was just like, it was just bizarre. It was like, nah, uh, our dialer manager does that. And your AI isn't going to know when someone's on their period or someone had a bad night. I was like, yeah, it's a bit more like, you know, think of it as like more overall than that. Um, so we have direct experience of like how this can be perceived. But I think that we're now reaching a sort of tipping point in terms of machine learning where people are really beginning to understand it. And I'm almost upset for us in a way, because I wish like we'd have done this 7 years later, because it'd have been a shitload easier to push out than it was 7 years ago, and the heartache and pain that we went through with it. Anyway, enough about that. So I'll tell you, like, at a high level, like, because we've literally done this, how to use it, and I've got a few thoughts on it. So number one, if you're buying leads, everything that I just said about examining the granular moments that make a sale is basically what machine learning is going to be doing, right? But it's actually doing it in advance. So rather than you running a report to find out, oh, I need to go and spend budget there, when a lead comes in, it gives you a probability score of the likelihood of that lead to convert to be a customer. But it doesn't just do that. It tells you what to do with that lead to enhance the probability of that person becoming a customer. Send it to this person, send it this message, say this thing, this is the pain point, this is whatever. And that is the difference machine learning will make. That everything we've been talking about in terms of analytics, it will do on the fly immediately with every single lead coming in, giving you the absolute perfect journey to take that person from prospect to customer. And you no longer have to worry about over-indexing and under-indexing, because you just build rules that go, well, if it's under a 35% chance of converting, we're fucking rejecting it. Whatever it is, that's, you know, like, this is reality, or we're only going to pay this much for it. That's what AI pushed into a lead management system does. There's another thing on top of this, which is, I saw someone mention this on LinkedIn earlier, and I thought it's interesting. I don't know whether it'd be true or not. There's going to be a premium on human interaction now.
Yeah.
Everyone's building bots. Every time I open my email, I've got a guy selling me a bot for generating leads, right? You know, it just talks back to you to qualify. It's like qualification thing, but imagine it's like, because it's natural language processing, it's just going like backwards and forwards and saying, you know, answering questions and really, really digging in, and then booking appointments. So the idea is you can use it for out of hour leads, and you can like perfect the journey this person goes through and whatever. You have to train it to do this. But we've all had this experience with our banks, when a lot of banks moved, let's say in the UK, and I know it's the same in the US, where they moved their call centers offshore, and they started closing down branches that you could go and visit. And there was like a, you know, people now still get pissed off about it. They're like, I just want to speak to someone who understands clearly what I'm saying. I don't want it to be a bot. I either want to go into a store, or I want to speak to someone who I can just, like, you know, get instantly like the result that I want. So what I find really interesting is lead generation going to go in two ways, where we have like AI completing sales effectively through bots and chats and whatever else, and then a more premium experience where it becomes like expertise with a person, and there's like it's like a concierge service that it's going through. So that's the other way I'm thinking what the future is, potentially. But it's a good way of generating leads. You know, if you've got a bot that can just go through and answer perfectly every question that someone has, and you know, rather than filling a form in, they're just sort of chatting to someone. That's what it feels like. And you're upfront with them, this is a bot, and then, you know, at the end of it, you have a perfectly crafted lead, or this person is like absolutely optimized to potentially convert. And then, you know, it's what sales process do you take them down? Are you going to use machine learning, or are you now going to give them a human to speak with? What do you think?
Well, I think there's two ways looking at it. Like you say, there's machine learning and how that will be used in the sales process itself, or to bring it back around to the podcast title, how you can take that data and uncover patterns. I mean, you can remember when we first did it, there was like weird stuff we found. Like there was one, and it was like, there was an inversely high correlation between people who had long street name addresses and their likelihood of buying organic vegetables. Like, you know, weird stuff that you just like, like it's things in data which no human would ever think to look for, but it finds. I have some weird flashbacks for this.
And that's the thing with it. So I might not have like labored the point enough with machine learning when we talk about, it's not going to just be looking at ad sets and sources and whatever. It's literally like the length of your street name correlates to something of you carrying something out and like more likely to buy organic vegetables. And the power in that is just,
isn't it? It's
insane.
To go back to what, like, say it's been about 5-6 years. I had a flashback. I remember writing an article when I think first probably started working here, and it was like, I think it was for the Times or something. It was like a top 100 companies thing, and I wrote an article about lead scoring and machine learning, and I was like, this is brilliant, but I don't know how much of an impact it had. But I just think I need to go find all that stuff, all this content, and republish it, because people will be interested now. But they weren't 5 years ago. Yeah. I think everyone was kind of like, this is interesting. Come to me when Google have done it. That was almost the attitude, which I think is probably something we suffer from a lot. But I think it was an interesting angle. I think we sort of veered slightly into machine learning territory, but just to bring it around to the podcast, it's about uncovering the data, understanding the data, and whether you use machine learning or you use just granular tracking and report, whatever you use, it comes down to this idea we want to reinforce, that you need to identify the specific moments that are leading to sales, not just thinking, that channel works, that one doesn't. You need to go as granular as possible and adopt a sophisticated approach to actually analyzing the data you have, reassessing your strategy based on that data, and getting more from the data to make more sales. That's what it comes back to. I think that's the key home that people listening will hopefully they'll take from this podcast. And and if anyone wants to speak to us about machine learning, I've got years worth of content no one read, which might be of interest. So just message me on LinkedIn. But cool, that was episode 98, how to identify where your sales are coming from and make more of them. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.